Hello, everybody. Aloha, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Condo Insider. I am your host, Raelene Tenno. I am the Education Chair for Hawaii Council of Condo Associations. And we've been doing Condo Insider now for, I want to say, about 7 years. So some of our previous recordings, previous to April 2024, were done with Think Tech Hawaii. But in April, they retired. So we had to find a new producer, and we had to create our own YouTube channel, which we've done. So our wonderful producer, media guru is Ikaika with Key Media. We're thankful to have found him. So today I have with me two individuals, and one of the big things that just kind of threw everybody into a tizzy is this Corporate Transparency Act, also known as CTA. So it is part of the federal government's, part of their efforts to track money laundering, illegal activities, dealing with money. The reporting goes into Financial Crimes Network, also known as FinCEN. And what I want everybody to understand is that FinCEN is just a data, kind of like a data bank. Just because you're reported in there doesn't mean that you're going to be under investigation. For example, Mishki, before he got arrested, he was probably already under investigation for years prior. So if you watch like the TV shows like Law and Order, those kind of things, you're going to see them mention when they arrest or thinking about arresting somebody, they'll look to see what they have in FinCEN. So it's kind of that kind of an operation. And we know, as condo people, we know that we're not money laundering. I mean, we're struggling to balance our budget, pay for maintenance items, but it's just another major, I want to say, a headache that we have to deal with. So it is a reporting. It also applies to businesses. So HOAs, community associations, we're not being singled out. So all LLC businesses have to do that. I know when we updated our signature cards for Hawaii Council, I had to do one as well at the bank. And the way they explained it to me, and I had to go back to her twice, repeat that again. So it's really, the board is responsible for the funds. And I kind of argued a little bit, and I said, but we don't necessarily handle them. The management company receives the money, they write the checks. But her comment back was, as board members, we are the overseers because we look at the financial statements every month, supposed to be looking at the financial statements every month. So we are the people in control. Plus we approve certain expenditures as well. So we are, part of what the government wants to do. Same with on the real estate end. Hawaii is one of a few states that is required when it's a cash purchase on a real estate. The escrow company is required to report that cash sale transaction as well. And real estate is one of the biggest avenues for money laundering. So that's why we're all wrapped into this big, huge thing. If people could just not think of other ways to launder money, and we've been on the news for money laundering, even with COVID monies. So I want to introduce our guests, our guru experts on the CTA. So first we have Allan Stachura. He's here. And then we have our local company, Joe Kamae, Byrne. She is with Honolulu Information Service. And they're like a public record search company. They can do criminal background checks, public records. So if you don't want to be found, just to make sure that they don't go to her and find you to look for you. So I'm going to let Allan take it away from here.
Great. Thanks so much. And just to start out, as mentioned, yes, FinCEN is certainly a data repository. They're holding on to the information for so many different purposes. But the Corporate Transparency Act is really just a major change that so many people are not aware of, and it's so important that people are familiar with it. The Corporate Transparency Act was introduced as part of the Anti-Money Laundering Act of of 2020, and it actually passed through the NDAA. A lot of folks are not familiar with the NDAA, except for the fact that it funds our military, but it tends to have a lot of other pieces that are added to it as well. The NDAA in 2020 was vetoed by then President Trump, and then Congress overrode that veto. And within that bill, it pushed through the Corporate Transparency Act. What that means is that we had a few years to prepare for the Corporate Transparency Act, which ultimately went into effect January 1st of 2024, so earlier this year, and more or less said that entities that are registered or incorporated in the United States will have to report certain information about their beneficial owners. The entity types that are included are really pretty wide-spanning. It includes corporations, limited liability companies, and then they throw in there and all other similar entity types that are registered with the Secretaries of State or formed by filing documents with Secretaries of State or tribal groups. And so it really impacts most of the business entities that are out there in the U.S. It does exclude general partnerships, and it does also exclude some like sole proprietorships that don't file anything with the Secretaries of State. The real goal, as mentioned originally, was to prevent illicit activity. They're trying to stop money laundering, terrorist financing, corruption, tax fraud, human and drug trafficking, security fraud, and several other things. And for those that may not be as familiar with the scope that's taking place outside of the United States, these laws have existed elsewhere, Europe, Asia, Australia, for many, many, many years. And there had been a lot of fights to try and institute something similar in the United States, but they hadn't been terribly successful up until this point, simply because all of the parties agreed on the concept that nobody wants money launderers running around, but how do we do it without impacting the legitimate businesses in a negative way, but still make it difficult enough that we don't help and assist folks that are really the criminals and who are taking advantage of the system. The proposed legislation really said that it would create a database of highly useful information and that it would be done in a way that would not negatively impact the businesses. Most businesses in the United States, we assume there's about 40 million businesses in the US, and we expect that about 32 million of them will have to comply with this new law. The reason not everyone will have to is because A, there are some entity types that it doesn't apply to, and then B, there are some businesses that are truly exempt. Those businesses are mostly the businesses that are highly, highly regulated elsewhere. So things like banks, insurance companies, security brokers, et cetera, they're already going through so many different pieces of compliance already that the government's pretty confident that they are not the bad apples that are out there committing the fraud. And so they get to deal with all the other headaches, and so they don't get to have a part of this headache itself. So really where this impacts is most of the everyday businesses, and probably most folks that think it doesn't actually apply to them. As we've gone around and we've tried to educate people over the years about who needs to be aware of this and who needs to be familiar with it. So many people say, well, this doesn't apply to me because I'm too small, or I don't make enough money, or I don't have enough employees. And the quick answer to that is all of those reasons are exactly why this does apply to you. There are exceptions for folks that are really large businesses and really regulated businesses, but the folks who think they don't need to comply are probably the ones who will actually need to comply. And that's really one of the key points that we want to make sure that people are familiar with. So a quote from the American Bar Association: through the CTA, Congress directs the United States Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, otherwise known as FinCEN, to establish and maintain a national registry of beneficial owners of entities that are deemed to be called reporting companies. Congress stated that bad actors seek to conceal their ownership of business entities through the use of shell companies to facilitate illicit activities, including money laundering, the financing of terrorism, human and drug trafficking, and securities fraud. All of these things we all agree are terrible and we don't want them to take place. So obviously, we're trying our best to put something in place to stop or make them more difficult without impacting the legitimate business entities that exist. So some key points for us to think about. What is the start date to report? Who needs to report? And what is identified as a beneficial owner? So we're reporting some very specific information. Basically, anyone who is not an exempt entity will need to do a report. If you were formed on or before January 1st of 2024, you have until January 1st of 2025 to do your initial report. If you were formed on or after January 1st of 2024, you have 90 days to do your report, unless you're formed next year. Once we get into 2025, those rules change again. The information that the CTA requires for entities, we have to have the legal name of the entity, a trade name if applicable, the principal or business street address in the United States, and there is some guidance for entities that may not have that, and then the taxpayer ID, which could be your EIN, your social security number, or your ITIN. For the beneficial owners and the company applicants, and I should probably define both of those for you, a beneficial owner is an individual who owns 25% or more of the entity, or someone who has called substantial control. And substantial control is a very legal term. It more or less is for you to decide who has substantial control or not. The things that may give you substantial control are the ability to spend large sums of money, hire and fire, make purchasing decisions, etc. The theory is that there may be entities that do not have individuals who own 25% or more. For instance, if you had 5 co-owners who all own 20%, everyone would say, well, no one owns 25%, we don't have to report. In the case of substantial control, there is always at least one individual at every entity that has that substantial control. So for those folks, we're considering them beneficial owners, and we need to report their legal name, their date of birth, their residential address. They need to produce some type of government issued identification, such as a driver's license or a passport. And with that, we'll need the number from the document, so their passport or driver's license number, the issuing state or jurisdiction, and then an image or PDF or photo of that document. There's then another term that we call company applicants. Company applicants are the individuals who form the entity. Now, the good news is if you existed prior to January 1st of 2024, you don't need to report your company applicant. You're grandfathered out of that. But if you were formed January 1st, 2024, or after, you do need to report your company applicant. And basically, that's the individual who filed the document. So it could be the person at your service company who filed it with the Secretary of State. It could be the attorney who put together the documentation for you, or the paralegal who filed it. Or it could be yourself if you filed it directly with the Secretary of State. And in that case, for those company applicants, we would also need their legal name, their date of birth, their business address, and then we're going to need a copy of their government-issued ID. So we get the number, the issue and jurisdiction, and that photo or PDF for upload. Those are all the components that are required in order to do the filing with FinCEN. So some warnings. The FinCEN's fraudulent correspondent warning. We all know that it's easy to take advantage of a new requirement, and the criminals always seem to be about 3, 4, 5, 20 steps ahead, and they never seem to lose the opportunity to actually take advantage of something that's new and fresh and confusing. And so what we've seen is a lot of different mechanisms where nefarious individuals or entities are actually trying to take advantage of folks who are either unfamiliar with the Corporate Transparency Act or who are really trying to comply and do all of the steps. We've seen all types of different mailers, whether they be letters, postcards, emails, texts, to entities, asking them if they need help filing their documents, trying to collect information from them, selling services that they'll never do, or in some cases recently, we've actually seen some trying to collect payment for fines that are due for non-compliance of the Corporate Transparency Act, and they've all been scams and frauds. Now, I do want to stress that there are a lot of legitimate companies out there trying to help you. For instance, CTA and many others really do have platforms that are set up in order to assist with the filings. But we'd also never try and solicit that information out of you. So if you get any type of mailer, questionnaire, official looking form, or a letter demanding payment, most likely it's fraudulent. And we encourage you to look at FinCEN's website, which for those that may not be familiar is fincen.gov/BOI for beneficial ownership information. And that'll provide you information on all of the known scams out there. I'll say that some are getting better and better. Just 2 weeks ago, we received a copy of one that was sent to many customers saying that they were past due and they were non-compliant and that they owed this sizable fine. And it had FinCEN's letterhead, it had FinCEN's true address, phone number, and website on the letter. So it looked really official. And then it said, you owe this amount of money for the non-compliance. Please scan this QR code to make your payment. And when you scanned the QR code, it took you to a website that was a payment website, totally unrelated to FinCEN. So if you were not familiar with the fact of what the actual requirements were, it seemed really legit and actually fooled a lot of people who were familiar. And so just be really, really, really careful if you're not dealing with a trusted service provider or FinCEN directly. Don't act, don't send them information, don't send them money, don't scan QR codes that you're not familiar with. Try and keep your data and your financial records just as safe as possible. So the start date, obviously, all of this started on January 1st of 2024. Entities that existed prior to that have until January 1st of 2025 to file their initial report with FinCEN. What that means is during this 1 year period, we're hoping that we're getting all of the reports on file as quickly as possible. I'll say last week, FinCEN surpassed 5 million filed reports. Now, we're expecting 32 million to file, so 5 million have filed. That means we're expecting 27 million to file in the next 2.5 months. So if you're on the fence and you're trying to decide if you should file or not, I'd encourage you to do it sooner rather than later. We do expect a lot of folks will try and do it at the very, very end. And of course, as you know, that's when we get into end of year holidays and a lot of PTO. The correct IT people aren't around to fix when the website crashes. And there's not the right resources if you need to ask your accountant or your attorney or your service provider some information because they may be on vacation as well. So I would not encourage wait until the last possible moment. The sooner you can get it in, the better off you're going to be. Companies that fail to comply with the law by willfully failing to report or update their beneficial ownership information can be subject to both civil and criminal penalties. And I'll say that these penalties are no joke. The penalty for willful non-compliance is currently $591 per day, up to a maximum of $10,000 in fines. Those amounts are inflation, so they could increase next year. But here's the kicker. It also says and up to 2 years of prison time. And obviously, none of us want to go down any of those paths. $500 a day could really throw a wrench into a pretty tight budget that you may be trying to handle. And so we want to avoid those fines at all costs. If you are not sure what you need to file, or if you're not familiar with all of the requirements, reach out to the resources that you have and ask for assistance. Don't just not file. and get yourself into bigger trouble by avoiding the problem altogether. So the information is being accepted as we speak. You can file directly on FinCEN's site, that's fincen.gov/BOI. The system is actually really stable and quite easy to use. And then there are a bunch of service providers just like us who are able to help you do everything from you can use our system to do it, and it makes it a little bit easier to we'll actually collect the information from you if you'd like and do it on your behalf. So there's a lot of legitimate resources out there that can help you. If you existed prior to January 1st of 2024, you've got until January 1st of 2025 to do that filing. If you started doing business or you had any entity in your portfolio that started doing business this year, so January 1st, 2024 or later, you have 90 days to get that report in. We get the question often from folks that say, "Ooh, I filed this year and I missed the 90-day mark. It's been 93. What do I do?" Get it in as soon as possible. Obviously, we all want to meet the deadlines. We all want to meet the requirements. But if you did miss it by a day or two, the best way to fix it is to get it in ASAP. Don't make it even later than it already is. The other thing to note is that starting next year, January 1st of 2025, that 90-day period decreases to 30 days. So if you are forming any entities next year, you only have 30 days to get that information on file for your initial report. I'll also mention that once you put the information on file, you are required to keep that up to date. So anytime the beneficial owner information changes or the information about the entity changes, you'll need to update that. And beneficial owner information could change in ways. It could be that you actually switch the beneficial owners who owns things or who has substantial control, or their underlying information changed. So for instance, if they got married or divorced and had a name change, if they moved and their residential address changed, or if their identifying document became expired and therefore the identifying document number changed. So things like they got a new passport, they got a new driver's license, et cetera. All of those events would trigger what we would call an updated report. And an updated report simply means that you need to file a new report in its entirety. So you're not just fixing the one piece, you're redoing the entire report from scratch. And that must be done within 30 days from when the change occurred. If you need to correct something because you did a report and you made a typo or left off a piece of information or included something that shouldn't be on there, you are able to correct those at any time. The law does state that you have 30 days from the date that you became aware of the inaccuracy or defect in order to make that correction. So know that 30 days is really something you should be pretty aware of because that's your update window and detection window in order to get those fixed. So lots of things to consider here.
So I have a question. So reporting changes.
In terms of, I'll toss it back over to you, Raelene.
Okay, so in terms of corrections or changes, so would that apply to their photo ID? Like the expiration dates, driver's license renewal?
So it needs to be an unexpired driver's license or passport. And so quite frankly, I would recommend more going with passport when you can, since they only expire every 10 years. For instance, a driver's license may expire every 4, and that makes it a whole lot more frequent in order to make the updates. So have an unexpired ID in order to get this done. And for folks that may be holding on to the last minute, that may be one of the things you want to make sure you have. Make sure that your passport or your driver's license isn't about to expire before the end of the year. But yes, you'll need to keep track of when those documents expire so that we can update the information with the current unexpired driver's license or passport as needed.
Okay, and then one more question.
Sure.
So after they fill out the information, is there something that comes back to them, like a copy of their reporting, so that they can keep it on file?
So it depends how you do it. If you do it through the FinCEN system, the last screen, it allows you to download what they call a transcript. And it more or less is a summary of all of the information that you put into the report. But you have to click to download it and save it before you submit. On the FinCEN system, when you do submit, you'll get an email saying that your filing went through properly. But I'll caution you, the email does not say the name of the entity that you filed for, because they consider that to be personally identifiable information. So it gives you a tracking number, but if you're doing, let's say, 4 or 5 of them, you could have trouble matching up which one is which. And it becomes even trickier if you only get 4 of the 5 back, and then you have to figure out which one didn't go through. If you use another system like our system, you put it all in, it'll allow you to preview it before you hit submit. And then at the end of it, it not only saves the information in the system so that it makes the updates easier, because all you have to do is change the piece that actually changed, but it'll also give you a PDF version and summary of everything that you put in, so you can save it in your records in paper or electronically, however you'd want. So depending on the system you use, you'll get some. It's all going to look a little different.
Having a PDF version, because time flies, and you don't realize, my license expired. Now I got to do this stuff, So that would be cool to have a PDF version that they can have on file. And I want to remind everybody that even though condominiums are required to do the biannual registration, when there's been, it's every 2 years, and whenever there's been a change in the identified person, nobody updates it to DCCA. So we have to get into practice after every annual meeting to make sure we do both, look at the biannual registration and your CTA updates. We have to make sure we get into practice with that. And it's still a board responsibility. So you can't just say, the management company is supposed to do it. We're still under that, I want to say the F word, fiduciary responsibility of making sure it gets done. So we can't just say, they're supposed to do it. We still have the ultimate responsibility to make sure it gets done. Okay, so I'll throw it back to you.
Perfect. So those are the basics concerning the Corporate Transparency Act. There are tons and tons and tons of specifics, and quite frankly, I think in a lot of cases, the questions outnumber the answers. FinCEN has been working closely with those of us in the service company arena as we've been feeding them the questions that we've gotten from our customers and from the law firms and the accountants, et cetera. And they've been revising what they call their FAQs, which they put on their website. There are various FAQs that get updated about every 3 to 4 weeks to provide more and more and more guidance and information. And those have really helped us complete the reports and figure out items. For instance, if you didn't have a U.S. address, or what do we do in the case where one of the beneficial owners has become deceased, et cetera, et cetera. It provides us the guidance of how to go through those small steps. But the biggest things to keep in mind is this is an active piece of legislation. There's a major due date coming up, January 1st of 2025. Everybody's going to have to have reported something. And there's a lot of legitimate resources out there that can help. Obviously, you've got local resources that can certainly help you out. They all know how to get in touch with us. And of course, you're always more than welcome to yell to folks like us if we can help you in any way, shape, or form as well. But I just encourage everybody to not avoid doing the Corporate Transparency Act responsibilities because those fines are hefty. And the federal government's not one that you want to mess around with. So I would just encourage you to get everything together, not wait till the last minute. Make sure your identification is not expired or about to expire, and get these forms started. It's really not that difficult to do the filing or to have someone else do the filing for you. The difficulty is gathering all the information. and making sure that you have all of the different pieces together that you'll need in order to complete the actual filing process.
Okay. So now I want to introduce our local vendor, Honolulu Information Service, Joe. And she's, like I said, a local company that can and works with Allan to submit the information for your BOI. So I want to turn it over to, before I turn it over, there's a couple of things I want to point out. Because some of the financial institutions are exempt from filing. And I kind of want to explain to people why they're exempt. Because like Allan had said, they have other oversight. So every financial institution has to have an anti-money laundering program in their system. And they have to do self-tests. And every financial institution is also examined by a federal agency. Every so many years, some might be every year, some might be every couple. I know mortgage companies are examined by the state on a rotating basis, and AML program is one of the things that they're examined on. So that's one of the reasons why some of the financial institutions are exempt from this filing, because they're under a different jurisdiction for anti-money laundering and that kind of stuff. Because recently, I think it was yesterday, TD Bank got a big hit. Was it 1.3 billion? I think, in penalties and fines.
3 billion.
Yeah, because they weren't.
3 billion. It was huge.
Yeah, they weren't complying with their AML, and it went back many, many years. So, so that's why certain entities, financial institutions, are exempt from that. And I also want to tell everybody that, you know, some of this efforts for money laundering started way back in 9/11. So this is not new that they created. It started way back after 9/11. I know for mortgages that we had to implement certain different procedures with that, because we had to get certain IDs and stuff like that, which we really didn't have to do before. But after 9/11, it became something in practice. And then is the filing done yearly or only one time?
It's only one time. So it's filing once, and then you only have to update it as something changes. Okay. So if nothing changes, you may not need to file for many, many years. Okay. Thankfully, it's not an annual requirement or a biennial requirement.
And that was one thing that was a big confusion, that some people were going to be charged a filing fee annually. And I said, no, I don't think so. I think it's one time. You know, so we want to clarify that the requirement is for a one time, and then updates as things change.
Correct. And I'll also mention that if you're doing the filing directly with FinCEN, there actually is no filing fee. It is probably the only thing with the federal government that's free. So, you know, you can rejoice in that. It is a free filing. Obviously, if you're using a service company or a law firm or someone else, then there will be a fee for this doing that. But the filing itself, unlike something state or your other federal filings, there's no fee for the actual filing itself.
Okay. So let's turn it over to Joe with Honolulu Information Service, because she does have the capabilities of doing this for our condo communities or even a business. I probably will go be chasing her down to do mine. I don't want to have to deal with it. I just rather give it to her to do it. So tell us a little bit about Honolulu Information, and you're prepped and ready to start?
Well, thank you very much, Raelene. And thank you, Allan, for that most informative presentation. There's a lot of moving parts to the CTA filing, and it's very important for us to be as clear and accurate as possible. And just kind of a little background, I'm Joe Kamae Byrne, and Honolulu Information Service, is also known as HONInfo, has been a company in public records research service since 1982. It originally started with my husband, Desmond Byrne. At the time, the two of us partnering together in 1992, a few years later, and taking it forward. But we do extensive public records services, mostly business transactional, as you can see in this brief background. But for this particular arena, we have been working very closely with Wolters Kluwer, CT Corporation, and partnering with them to offer this the filing service. We find that it has been most user-friendly, very, very clear and easy. You can pause and return and not lose anything, much more user-friendly in the process. So we're very pleased that we have this partnership and are working with them to be able to help our own clients. And we are definitely very familiar with some of the requirements of condo associations, not only from a personal experience with friends and family members who have served on boards, but through the DCCA and, as you say, the biannual requirements for filings and the challenges about actually complying. And this one is definitely one we want to pay attention to compliance. So we're local, we're available, we're probably related to somebody on your board. So feel free to call us anytime.
And since they're exposed to, using the system, I'm sure they can do it a little bit more expeditiously if you're doing it yourself, because sometimes you have to click here, or you can't click there, then you got to go back and do this. Sometimes it'd be less frustrating to just, have an expert do it. Just to remember, everybody, this is a yearly filing, and any updates, there is a small charge for any updates every year, or when that update needs to happen. So driver's license expiration. I think our driver's license, the renewal period is a little bit longer than it was before. Yeah. I think. I know you have a choice to make it longer. I'll have to check my driver's license after we get off of here to see when mine expires, because I know I took the longer one. But, even your passport renewals, you got, certain things you got to remember if you're going to use your passport, but it does require a photo ID, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
I just want to make sure that because it's the condo associations, it requires filing for any kind of changes. So we're talking about new members coming on board or members stepping out. These are changes that have to be reported. So being aware of any kind of, not only the details about our expiration on IDs, but on the transition within the service of your boards. So that's going to be the biggest impact, I think, for you to be alert. All right. Just as a reminder.
That's a good point, because some people thought it was for the whole entire condo.
No.
Every single unit. And I go, I don't think so. No. But it's really only the board members that would be the report, that have to be on the reported entity part. It's not every single unit owner. It's just the condo board.
Yes.
So we want to make that clear. And again, it's a yearly filing, not an annual filing. It's a yearly filing. And the other point is some people felt that it wasn't secure. And I said, well, your database is already, your driver's license is already with the city. Your passports are already filed with the federal government. Your social security number is filed with the federal government. FinCEN is a federal agency. So it's, I want to say, the utmost and secure, right?
So it is a super secure database. FinCEN has it in, the level is right below classified information. So it is a very secure database. It is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So your friends and neighbors and employers can't put through a FOIA request and get your information out of there. But it is accessible by different governmental agencies. So our friends in the Secret Service and the IRS and the FBI and so on and so forth can all log in and utilize that information. And there are plans in the future that banks will be able to access that information when they have permission from the individuals at the entity. So that would be a voluntary use of the information, and that will come in the future. But I would expect when that does come down the pike that most banks may make that part of the contingency in order to do some type of lending or some other type of deal. And so that really highlights the fact of you want to have this this information up to date, not only because it's the law and because the federal government is requiring you to do so, but at some point in the future, it may impact some of your financial transactions if you haven't complied or if you're not up to date. I do just want to clarify, though, it is not a filing you have to do every single year. It is just a filing that you have to do when a change occurs. So if you don't have a change that's occurred in 2025, you don't need to do anything in 2025. But when your board does change, or when your photo ID changes, or when someone's name changes, or someone moves, or whatever that type of modification would be, then you would need to do an update. So hopefully it's not overwhelmingly difficult, but still keeping track of those expiration dates and keeping track of all the moving pieces, that's really, that's going to be the secret sauce, is trying to make sure that you don't forget about it. Because I think about it when I move houses, the first thing I'm going to not think of is, oh, hey, I should update all of my FinCEN reports. It's probably quite far down the list. You know, call the moving company, turn on power and cable and water, and then, oh yeah, let me update FinCEN. But we need to get into the habit of thinking that way, because it will be a step in the process. Every single time you move, you change names, the board makeup becomes a little bit different. So it becomes a mindset, an ongoing mindset. So just keep that in mind.
That's why when I got married, I didn't have to change. I said, do I have to change my name? And he said, no. I said, okay, thank you. It's too much work.
Yes.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
And just like when you do move, some of the last things that people think about is the address change.
Yeah.
They don't do that. And so they get frustrated when they're like, I'm not getting my mail. What, did you do an address change? Oh, I forgot, you know. So yeah, there's now a bigger list of things to do when you move, you know, so things to be cognizant about. So any other last minute tidbits for our condo associations? And I mean, this is going to go out to a variety of people. Some of them own LLCs as well. So I think I heard from somebody that if a unit is owned under an LLC, they will have to do that. That unit owner is responsible, not the condo. Yes. The unit owner will be responsible for reporting that also, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that's just a little tidbit. So if anybody has any questions regarding the CTA, they can reach out to Hawaii Council. If I can't answer it, then I'll probably forward it to either Joe or to Allan, or probably to Joe, and then she can forward it if she can't answer it. But we really want everybody to get on board, get prepared. I know I'm getting prepared to get the paperwork together to get this done. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of Condo Insider. We look forward to another edition coming soon. And thank you to Joe. Thank you for Allan. I know you're in the Pacific somewhere. In the Pacific time.
Los Angeles today.
I really want to thank you both for working together with us to put this Condo Insight together. It's been very informative. And everybody just get on board, get it done.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much, guys.
Reach out with questions. We're all happy to help. Thanks so much for having us.
Okay. Thank you.